The Russian economy is only 20% larger than Australia's. So why is Donald Trump pretending that Russia is a great power and in a strong position to negotiate? Russia is not a great power. The Australian and Kazakhstan economies together are the same size as the Russian economy. Think about that. It's not a great power. Russia's GDP is 2 trillion. America's is 30 trillion. The US has no need to negotiate with Russia on an even footing. Why there is a pretense that it does is hard to explain. The Russian economy is a basket case. With 140 million population, still manages to be in dire straits. The Russian economy is less than 7% the size of the US and less than 3% the size of the Western powers together. Less than 3%. The US doesn't need to negotiate with Russia to end the war. If it just threatened to double the assistance to Ukraine, Russia would have no choice but to stop the invasion. This could be achieved very easily. A bit of history. The USSR, or the Soviet Union, with Russia at the centre, was a totalitarian communist regime that lasted for about 70 years, from 1917 to 1991. After the Second World War, it built up a large nuclear arsenal. The Soviet Union and the United States then entered into a Cold War. The USSR collapsed in 1991, imploding under the weight of its hopeless system of government. The West had won the Cold War, and liberal democracy was seen as the only legitimate remaining system of government. There was hope that the former countries of the Soviet Union would become free market democracies and join the West in a peaceful and prosperous world. Most countries did do that, like the Baltic states of Latvia, Lithuania, and Estonia, and then Romania, Bulgaria, and Poland, and others. But in Russia, out of the bowels, out of the cesspool of communist dictatorship, a KGB agent, a creature of the Soviet Union called Vladimir Putin, rose to power, and for 26 years has been running a dictatorship in Russia, complete with sham elections, pretend elections. For the past 15 years, economic growth has been weak. Putin has turned the country into a kleptocracy. He and his oligarch friends have robbed the country for themselves. He has jailed his political opponents and destroyed the free press, even murdering journalists who wouldn't be silenced, and having his agents poison dissidents in Europe. It has been a horrendous and brutal dictatorship. In 1994, after the collapse of the Soviet Union, there were a lot of nuclear weapons in Ukraine. It was then agreed between the EU, Britain, Russia and Ukraine under the Budapest Memorandum that Ukraine would give up their nuclear weapons in return for a security guarantee from the other parties. Russia breached that agreement first with its incursions into East Ukraine and then with its annexation of Crimea in 2014, followed by the full-scale invasion of Ukraine in 2022, just 3 years ago. For this entire period, the US has been supporting Ukraine with sanctions against Russia and military support, especially after the invasion, as have all the Western powers, as you would expect. Russia was unsuccessful in destroying Ukraine and acquiring it in 2022. The war has been going for 3 years, and Russia continues to bomb and invade and kill Ukrainian soldiers and civilians. Even in the last few days, we've seen missile strikes on Kiev and the murder of civilians and soldiers alike. Estimates vary, but the UN puts the casualties at approximately 70,000 soldiers killed and up to 400,000 injured. 12,000 civilians have been killed and 29,000 injured. This war has been conducted on Ukraine soil, not on Russian soil. So it's only the Ukrainians that are getting private civilians being killed in their thousands, including 673 known so far children killed and 1,865 injured children. This is leaving out the millions permanently traumatized by this war and the estimated 1 trillion of property and infrastructure destroyed. The Ukrainians have fought back with the support of the West, and Russia has suffered casualties of about 500,000 to 700,000 soldiers, about 165,000 estimated to be killed, according to Mediazona and BBC News. Putin clearly doesn't care about his own people. They refer to this kind of military strategy as the meat grinder. We used to call that phrase cannon fodder, but they're calling it the meat grinder. It's nasty. up to 700,000 Russian casualties. The Russian economy has been drained by all of this. It wasn't long before the overwhelming power of the Western alliance, including the United States, would prevail. But then we got Donald Trump. He has strangely and weirdly and crazily supported Vladimir Putin and has now pulled the US out of supporting Ukraine, including ending intelligence on the battlefield. It's just mind-boggling. I don't want to make any videos unless I have something new to say that I don't believe has been addressed by the media, mainstream or otherwise. Hence my discovery when I was looking at a list of GDP by country. I noticed that the economy of Russia was only about 20% larger than that of Australia. This is an extraordinary fact. Why is Donald Trump pretending that he's negotiating with a great power? Russia is less than 7%, as I said, the size of the US. The US is a colossus, the largest empire in history by far. If the United States were to double the support it has been providing to Ukraine, or even threaten to triple it, then Russia would have no choice but to stop the invasion and withdraw. To put it into some perspective, Russia is less, as I said, than 3% the size of the combined Western powers, including the US. Its economy has recently been tanking. The Russians are in deep trouble. The US and the West were not far off from defeating Russia in this war. It wasn't difficult to do. So why Trump has given Putin a free pass to continue invading Ukraine and murdering its people is absolutely bizarre. He has blood on his hands. If he had moved to end the war on day one of his presidency, as he said he was going to do, tens of thousands of dead and wounded soldiers and civilians would still be alive, and children for that matter. He could have prevented those deaths. You can only speculate as to why this aberration has occurred. It is either that Trump loves dictators and dictatorships and fascism and has no empathy for anybody and feels a kinship with other dictators. And we can see all this through the fact that he's currently in the process of turning the United States into a dictatorship. They're chipping away at all the institutions and accountability mechanisms, both in the legal system and otherwise, and abusing the presidency. Dictatorship is, and fascism is, his ideology and his purpose. It involves cruelty to masses of people, including minorities, and aggregating power into the presidency. The other reason that could be relevant is that he's looking to gain personally from Russia. He has turned the US government into an illegitimate criminal enterprise, so that could well be the reason. His family has made an additional $1 billion per month since he's been in power. Or as many in the press and members of Congress have asked, is he actually a Russian asset? That is a reasonable question in the circumstances. Does Putin have something on him, or has he been a Russian asset for a long time? Or is he just a Russian asset because of his support for dictatorships like Russia? The United States spent trillions of dollars during the Cold War helping to bring down Russia and the Soviet Union, and the US has followed up by supporting Ukraine in its defense against Russian invasion. And now Trump has ended that support and is backing Russia. It's just bizarre. Something is terribly wrong with the leadership in the USA at the moment, but I suppose that isn't news. The issue of nuclear weapons has played a role in this story. Russia has a large nuclear arsenal, but no country can deploy nuclear weapons because of a reality called MAD, MAD. It stands for Mutually Assured Destruction. Countries with nuclear weapons cannot attack each other without assuring their own destruction, so they can't use nuclear weapons. The only circumstance in which a nuclear power can deploy nuclear weapons is if it is invaded by another country. The American right-wing Russian apologists have said that the West caused the war by encouraging Ukraine to join the EU or NATO. The idea being that Russia needs a security buffer zone, presumably in the form of a whole entire country that it doesn't have the right to acquire or annex. I mean, it's a separate country. It's not your country. But no country can invade a nuclear power. Russia does not need a buffer zone. The idea is ridiculous. Russia has 5,000 nuclear weapons. No country can invade Russia. The issue here isn't a buffer zone. So why has Russia invaded Ukraine? It's simply that Russia wants to acquire Ukraine for itself. It's an imperialist-style invasion. Putin has run the Russian economy into the ground, and the only way he knows to grow is to attack and plunder the neighbouring country. It would also bolster Russians' power in the world. The USSR and Russia lost the Cold War. There is some sense that he wants to rebuild the empire, but they lost the war. That's the whole point. Ukraine and the other countries of the former Soviet Union are now free, sovereign countries. Ukraine is free to join whichever international organisation it wants to. Russia lost the Cold War, as I've said, and the Soviet Union disintegrated. The West cannot allow Russia to try to reverse that conclusion. That's my take on the Ukraine war. And the key news for the day is that Russia, the Russian economy, is only 20% larger than that of Australia. And so this whole idea of the US needing to negotiate with Russia is absurd. Russia does not have a foot to stand on, and nuclear weapons are not the reason you are negotiating with Putin. In the event of nuclear war, his own world would be destroyed. He would most probably lose his own life. That's another reason why nuclear powers would not use nuclear weapons. Thank you very much. I'll look forward to talking to you next time.